Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 53rd episode of Retuning Your Firm. And I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today. Really strong panel. Just talking a little through them. First of all, I'd like to introduce Ben Wightwick, technology at HighQ, and he's going to be talking today about technology solutions that deliver value. Welcome, Ben. Everyone can see you. Great. Our second guest is Cath Dovey, who is co-founder of the Beacon Collaborative. And she's talking about overcoming some of the barriers to giving among the wealthy. And let's remember here that we're not just talking about Bill Gates, we're also talking about partners and professional firms who, as we all know, are also quite wealthy. Perhaps not in Bill Gates' level, but hey, that's another story. Welcome, Cath. Our regular, if you like, Francesca Lagerberg. Welcome, Francesca. And as you probably know, if you've seen her before, if we're the 53rd episode, this is her 50th, actually. It's her 50th. Wow. I haven't thought that one out until today. But anyway, she's the global leader for network capabilities at Thornton, which is great. And our final regular, welcome back, Jeremy. And it's great because Jeremy's technically on holiday today. But he said, no, I don't want to miss the show. So thank you for interrupting your holiday to be with us today, Jeremy, way beyond the call of duty. Much appreciated. And he is the managing partner of accountancy firm Haysmacintyre. So that's your lineup. So as said, yours truly, obviously, the founder and chief executive of the Managing Partners Forum. Before we get into the poll, just quietly give you a little bit of an update as to what's going on within the forum itself. As you may recall, there's a summit coming up on the 22nd of June. And what I've done there is we've taken 25 of the people whose contributions to the show, the slots, if you like, have gained the most views on YouTube, and then invited them to come back for a sort of jamboree, if you like, a big sort of get together with 28 panelists in a space of a couple of hours, maybe 3. So quite a big event for us. Tuesday roundtables, as you probably know, we have a number of groups, the finance group, marketing group, and HR group, etc. And what they do is they meet every Tuesday from 8:45 till 10. And we're looking at different themes. There's a theme that we're looking at, we've just finished really looking at, which is how do you manage in a hybrid world? And the way we work is that yours truly presents the sort of some of the slides coming from the polls that we're about to do today. And then we move into a really interesting, almost a peer group discussion amongst the members. So that works really well. And so my presentation of this week on Tuesday, which we gave to the knowledge group, was basically around about 20 minutes, some really interesting slides. That's available on YouTube. I'll be sending you an email about that shortly. Talking of videos, there are literally hundreds of people who are watching the videos literally every week at the moment. It's really quite active. And so if you haven't had a chance to, or if you missed a few, do check those out. It's in the forum website under Retuning Your Firm. Peer groups, we've had 2 new members this week, which is amazing. So do look at those, because even if it's not necessarily your cup of tea, could be somebody else on your management team for whom a peer group could be really helpful, particularly somebody who's new to role. And very soon now, gosh, nearly there, we have our Excellence Awards, our Management Excellence Awards. We're running them in June. That's allowed us to have a look at a full year of sort of COVID management, if that's the right term. And what I do is I wanted to give you a kind of a sneak preview of the garden that we are going to be showing for that particular event, which I think you'll agree is absolutely gorgeous. So really looking forward to that, and thanking Ian Beveridge of Telepresence for making that garden available to us. So what's going on next? Well, basically what I want to do now is just to kind of talk you through the poll. And as always, the feedback from the UK government is amazing. Your poll results are incredibly valuable in our analysis during these dynamic times. I didn't ask for it. It's an amazing piece of feedback to get. So thank you for that. So before we go into this week's poll, which is our monthly sector tracker, I'd like to talk you through the state of strategy poll that we looked at, and some of you will have completed last week. And the first question was, how would you describe the balance between strategy and operations at your firm during lockdown? And if you can't see the words, which is not impossible. But basically, what we were seeing was at the top, it's the situation where you have significantly more emphasis has been placed on operations and on strategy. And that was 33% of you. More emphasis is placed on operations and strategy. That was 47%. And equal emphasis has been placed. That was 20%. So more importantly, maybe there is then nothing below in the strategy has had more emphasis than operations. So very much a sort of skewed distribution using the technical term. Moving on now to the, actually make it a bit fuller, moving on to the slightly busier slide in terms of what are the three most important activities. That's the blue line. And moving from the right, the far right, 71% saying considering why clients choose the firm. And the far left, articulating the firm's competitive advantage at 14%. And then you can see the blue line kind of makes its way through. The red line are the areas in which people feel that their firm has been most effective during lockdown. And in a way, what that's telling us, I think, is that people broadly, with some exceptions, have put their effort into the areas which are seen to be important. The one that's different is the one right at the far left, which is articulating the firm's competitive advantages, where there is really quite a significant distinction between 14% saying it's important, 53% saying that it's something that they've been very good at. Now, to do something that isn't very important, but to do it very effectively isn't necessarily the best use of time. So I just kind of bear that thought with you. And then on the least effective, which is the olive line, again, as you kind of expect, it sort of doesn't quite do the inverse of the blue line, but broadly it's going in that same way, but with a couple of areas which are much stronger than. And remember, these are the three things in which they've been least effective. So reviewing the firm's KPIs to ensure that they measure the right outcomes, 60% of you saying that's not very good at that. 53% haven't thought about reviewing the firm's management systems to ensure they support the firm's strategic choices. And then 40% of you are saying that you haven't been very good at identifying the capabilities necessary to win in the firm's core markets, and 47% about articulating the firm's competitive advantages. So whilst, yeah, for the thing that considering why clients choose the firm, that's very low, only 13% have included that in least effective. There are some other ones which I think, again, are worthy of additional information. So let's move on. So what else are we saying? Well, there's also some points that I think are quite worth making in terms of other findings. So strategy is owned by the board at over 50% of firms and updated fairly often, based mainly on informal monitoring. That conferences, books, and briefings are the most common ways to stay up to date with the latest thinking on strategy. That the four most commonly used tools are, as you can see, setting goals and measurable milestones, aligning ops with corporate goals, focusing on performance excellence, and SWOT PEST. And then the advocacy one, to what extent would people speak highly about their own firm's strategy? And only 60% of people felt that they would speak highly. 33% will be neutral, and we all know what that means in English, and 7% will actually be critical. Now, that may not be in sabotage sense, but they would certainly be critical. So now it's time to move on. We've had a look at last week's poll to move on to this week's poll. And as always, today it's the monthly sector tracker, and it covers business priorities, it covers barriers to optimal performance, what is being discussed at management meetings, projected dip, if any, in income, activity levels, headcount, and new workflow, the extent of home working, and home office-based requirements post the pandemic. Right, so let's have a look and share the results. So what's that telling me about the current situation? Well, the ones that we've already found, have been the most, the highest priority, remain the high priority. We're talking about operational efficiency. We're talking about developing a clear purpose and strategy. Those are typically the two highest, and which is exactly the case again, as you can see. And then we're into the sort of the second ones, which are essentially around skills and capabilities, and increasing technologies come a bit higher than usual. So there you go. Anyway, that's the first question. So in terms of what level of dip in your firm's income are you projecting over the next 12 months? 100% of you are saying the answer to that is none. Don't think we've ever had a none before on that one. And in terms of Expansion level of activity, 81% a modest expansion, 6% a significant expansion. So that's nudging 90%, 13% no change, nobody contracting. We're looking now to new work. The same comment applies. 88% modest, 6% significant, 6% no change, no contraction. And if we're looking at headcount, which is sort of something that is particularly important for a lot of people, not quite such high numbers, 31% no change, 70% expansion, no contraction. We've been tracking this for about 15 months now, I think a bit longer. That is by far and away the most optimistic outlook that we have ever had on this show. So that's something that was quite interesting. In terms of working from home, around half remains the sort of number that comes through, 44% this week. So there's no real changes there. Everyone working from home, 6%. Everyone back at the office, 0. That's pretty much what we've had before. Do you anticipate changes to your office space requirements? They are about the same for most people, 63%. A little bit more space, about 30% on less space. But again, I think it's kind of works together, doesn't it, in a way? Because if you're expanding, then normally you might think of taking on more office, but the reality, you would probably now be looking at doing it with more space per head, but keeping the same office overall square footage. So what are the constraints? Financial health of the client base comes through quite strongly. We were looking at the poor economic outlook, and that's again nudged up a bit. It's still in there. So, I mean, it's in a sense, we've had this on a previous poll where we asked people about, how are you feeling about ready for post-COVID, and how are your clients feeling, or your major clients? And actually what came out with quite strongly was that the major clients were not as positive and not as focused on success. But of course, at the end of the day, if you have a client and they can't pay you, well, that's not a good place to be. So the poor economic outlook coming through as a second. What are the areas that are carrying weight? Well, today we have the marketing, which has come through ahead of finance. That's again happened once, I think, in the last few months. But again, new business generation and marketing, feeding the expansion, if you like. I guess what you could say is that the management is moving back more to supply issues, that people are now focusing a bit more on skills shortages. They're focusing a little bit more on things that otherwise we'll come to that in a sec. So what's carrying the weight? Again, we talked about that. And then the final one is, our leaders are accessible, 94%. Our leaders are transparent, 63%. I mean, these are amazingly high numbers, as I'm sure you gathered. And I think part of the reason, and I won't use, well, I was going to say it, so I will, but I think some firms have had a good pandemic in the sense that they have partnership relationships have become much stronger. The financials are kept in a good place. And and the leaders are seen to have led in a very effective way. I mean, these are exceptional numbers, according to Andrew Kakabadze, who's Professor of Government and Leadership at Henley, who's on our board, and he kind of knows, he tracks about 14,000 boards, so he knows much more than we do on that space. But then again, I would like to introduce our first guest. So please welcome Ben. And if you recall, Ben's going to be talking to us about technology solutions that deliver value. And Ben is the Director of Platform Solutions at HighQ. So welcome, Ben. Over to you, sir.
Hi guys, how you doing? So Richard invited me to talk about sort of technology solutions that deliver value, and I think it was a quite small sentence, but I could go in many different ways. So what I really wanted to talk about isn't really technology, but there is some technology aspects to it. So I've been at HighQ for 10 years. Prior to that, I was 10 years at CMS doing technology and IT stuff. And really, one of the things that I've seen over the last sort of 5 years particularly, but even more so in the last 2 years, is a couple of key trends around the use of technology and how technology is impacting and changing the way, particularly law firms, but professional services firms are approaching business. And I think of technology as one of 5 things. So I always talk about technology in the context and in the surroundings of culture, process, the client themselves, and data. And all five of those things play a really key part in strategy, in operationalizing elements of your business. But actually, a lot of time, people just start to think about the technology itself, and technology sort of becomes the silver bullet almost, and you forget about the other aspects. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about the other aspects of the world that influences technology adoption. So the first one of those is actually how multidisciplinary teams come together and can come together to provide a tremendous amount of value. So in the context of providing a client a solution, a technology solution, whatever it might be, how do you bring together the right team at the right time and within the right context? Oftentimes I've seen examples of bringing in marketing when marketing's needed, and bringing in finance when finance is needed, and various other sort of component parts, the lawyers, the partners, and everything else. And actually, what I've seen in the last couple of years is teams with a sort of a grounding and an initiative and a focus come together on day one almost. And so it's almost like a matrix effect of you've got marketing in the room, you've got a partner in the room, you've got some lawyers, paralegals, whatever that might be. You've got technology, you've got marketing, as I said, finance, and you're bringing them in to actually start talking about how you can sort of deliver something at the beginning. And that is winning through. That is really shining through in terms of how the outcomes and those solutions are being brought together. Now, the technology is part of the delivery mechanism. Technology these days is a bit of a commodity in that sense, but it's how you stitch everything together that is really key. And so thinking about specialist roles and complementary skills and how they come together, really high levels of collaboration and innovation and ideation, thinking about sort of building out services that don't look like Windows 98, because the technology is there. And actually, the technology these days, whether it be Microsoft, HighQ, or any other technology, Brighter, for example, you can still make it look terrible. You can still make the experience look awful, even though it's very functional. And I think there's a really big drive towards user experience and overarchingly the customer experience, which is the second sort of trend that I'm looking at the moment. And everyone talks about customer experience. And I've lived in a world where I've been responsible for a global team of customer success managers. So we spend a lot of time talking about adoption and supporting our customers and being almost like their confidants and they're sort of supporting sort of players behind the scenes. But what does that mean if you can't sort of invoice a customer correctly? What does that mean if you can't do something else? You could provide the best technology, the best experience, but actually if you can't get all of the little bits stitched together in the right way, then you're still ultimately not providing an overarchingly good experience for the customer. And I see a lot of our law firm clients now taking a step back and sort of really starting to think about, okay, well, how is this customer engaging with the firm as in the big, and what does that mean, and how are we engaging with them, and what kind of reporting are we offering them, what kind of experiences are we looking at? And experiences are increasingly becoming digital experiences, so self-service elements of what you would normally have done sort of 10 years ago, whether it be logging in to find out the WIP or the invoices or anything else, but it would have been a phone call or it would have been a request in through via email. And those sorts of things are changing the dynamic of the relationships and dynamic of the experiences. And I think the third thing to talk about really is how particularly our customers, probably over the last 4 or 5 years, and customers of technology solutions like HighQ are relying on the ecosystem. So perhaps HighQ can't do everything, but actually it can integrate with many different systems, as Richard will know because he does it all the time. But how do they come together? And then how do you create something that is sort of, how can you commoditize or productize your knowledge and your expertise? And a lot of time they become value add services for some of your high paying customers. But actually the opportunity to create revenue and competitive advantage is really rich, and sort of transposing what would have been an engagement with a lawyer and would have been high volume. Actually, how can you replace that with technology? How can you replace that with some kind of environment that looks good, operates well, is accessible 24/7, regardless of geography? And how do you do that in a way that actually supports your revenue targets? How does it support you to create a competitive advantage over your competitors, obviously, but how does it make that client experience stickier? How can you bring people closer? How can you drive new revenue? And they're the three things that I'm seeing. So technology is a sort of a foundation for all of those things, but having a really sort of clever, smart collection of people with differing skills and specialist roles and increased collaboration, how they come together with the customer experience and productizing services and solutions. I think technology is the foundation there, but all of these three are three things that I'm seeing many of our law firms, customers driving forward. Not necessarily just because of the pandemic, but there has been an increase because of the pandemic in terms of how they're operationalizing things. Anyway, I think I've overspoken. I don't know how long I had or what I needed to do, but maybe that, and obviously ask any questions if you've got them, and I'm available afterwards as well.
Fantastic. Well, you're going for your jab shortly, I know. So we're going to let you off at about 5 to 10. So thank you very much, Ben. And as you say, I think possibly when people kind of think about a professional firm, they kind of think about the frontline advisors and how the frontline advisors alone are the ones who really matter. And I think the message I'm getting from your talk was that actually, no, it's a partnership between lots of people with different skills all coming together to make that client experience the most amazing one possible. Right, we're going to switch to a totally different topic now. As you know, we don't like to have a single theme in these shows. And I've invited Cath Dovey. Now, Cath, as you probably saw earlier, she's the co-founder of the Beacon Collaborative. And she's going to be talking about how you can overcome the barriers to giving among the wealthy. Over to you, Cath.
Thank you so much, Richard, and good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I haven't been on one of these sessions before, so it's been very interesting just to see the poll results. And I was really fascinated that we've got about, I think just under half of you were saying that people issues are going to be a focus for strategy over the coming months. And I was really surprised. I thought it would be much higher than that. And the reason for that, I think, is we have seen over the last 2 years an enormous shift in the working habits of our professionals. We are the sector really that has in many ways had a good pandemic, but I think there are going to be some fascinating issues that we're all going to have to face up to. And one of those is how we engage our people. So I'm talking about giving, but I want to talk about giving in the context of employee engagement. And I think before the pandemic, we'd already seen some really significant shifts in the way that firms were marketing themselves externally, a real shift towards values, a real shift in things like sponsorship to making sure that they were not just being seen in the right places, but were being seen doing the right things. And I think that was a really significant pre-pandemic trend that we were already seeing. I think as we come out of the pandemic, we're going to have to start focusing internally and how do we project our values and our position within society? How do we make sure that that's part of our internal strategy as well as our external strategy? So I want to talk to you about giving. I want to talk to you about ways that you can use corporate giving strategies to engage your people. We undertook some research recently within the Beacon Collaborative among young professionals. We did focus groups across the UK, up in Scotland, in Wales, all across the UK, all across England as well, with young professionals to talk to them about their giving. Because I think you will have seen the same surveys I've seen over many years, which is this millennial generation focuses much more on values and impacts than perhaps those of us who are in our 40s, 50s, 60s and onwards. And what does that actually mean for them? What was very interesting was the extent to which young, high-earning professionals really do care about their giving, but at the moment feel very unsupported. And I think there's a real opportunity here for firms to potentially step in and to support them. I thought it might also be helpful to give you a bit of context about what's been going on in the charity sector over the last year and a half. Professional firms have had a reasonably good pandemic. The charity sector has faced an absolute perfect storm of having to transition their business models, seeing need escalating through the roof and seeing their incomes plummet. Pro Bono Economics is forecasting a £10 billion gap in income for the charity sector this year. And for those of you who saw the Sunday Times Rich List at the weekend, it was fantastic to see new giving by the wealthy has gone up by $1 billion, but we're still 9 billion short of what we need to keep our charity sector operating over the next 12 months. So I think this is a moment where professional services firms can think about what they're doing in their communities. They can think about how they can reflect their values to their employees through their corporate giving strategies. And there are some really good ways of doing this. Payroll giving, I think many of you will be familiar with. I'm sure many of you operate schemes already. In America, just for contrast, 80% of firms in the US already offer payroll giving. 70% of firms match their employees' donations. I tried to find equivalent data for the UK and it doesn't exist. So let's just assume that firms in the UK are not really offering payroll giving to the same extent as we see in the US. If you're thinking about your more senior management, there are donor advised fund schemes that you can offer that are corporate. This is essentially a giving ISA where you can pay into this, it rolls up tax-free, and then when you're ready to spend it, you can give it to good causes. Fantastic tool for executives who are too busy now, and for young people who are too busy now, but might want to think about giving in the future. Matching is really important. Matching is probably the biggest incentive to giving of all of the incentives that are out there. Tax incentives are great. Matching is even better because really that takes the small amount that an individual can give and it doubles it, and it makes it really worthwhile for them to do this. I think also I would flag to you, doing things in the local community, wherever your communities are. This is not only good for internal employee engagement, also obviously it's fantastic for external engagement, or for all of those of you who are looking for innovations and new ways of building your brand and marketing. Now you're on the front foot. Local engagement is really important. And then lastly, I would put on your radar financial advice and the real importance that financial advisors play in the giving equation. Just simply asking, have you thought about giving? Have you given anything this year? Would you like to give something next year? That question can really prompt people to think, maybe this is something I do want to take more seriously. And I think there's a real opportunity for corporates to potentially bring that advice into their planning capabilities for their executives. So I want to leave it there because I want to have lots of time for questions, but we're in a very tricky situation for our third sector in the UK. If we value our civil society, if we value all of the organisations that are operating across the UK trying to support our communities, then it's a moment, I think, as professional services firms to think about corporate giving as part of that strategy for re-engaging with our communities and re-engaging our people.
Oh, thanks, Cath. That's really interesting. And I always kind of reflect that particularly this may be a point for accountancy firms. So welcome Jeremy's thoughts, but we can be quite good at helping our clients, giving as part of the sort of tax piece, helping them think about ways they could be, allocating money to good causes. All too often, though, when it comes to the internal issue of your tax department doing it for your own partners, it's here's the comps, mate, just sign there. So I think there is a big opportunity internally as much as externally. I'd like to pass now to Francesca, and welcome back after your week away, and love to hear what you have to say today.
Oh, no, thank you, Richard. And oh gosh, thank you both, Cath and Ben, for those. And I just wanted to pick up a couple of points before we go into hearing Jeremy and questions. I think in terms of the tech piece that Ben was talking about so passionately, I do like that thinking around using tech as an enabler and really stressing the humanity element, because I've seen so many situations over the last year where people have looked to see tech as an answer to things, but haven't really thought through the humanity point of it. How do people collaborate? How do they ideate? How do they get together? How can they use technology to help them do that? But in the classic cliche, garbage in, garbage out, tech can't help you if your thinking isn't there. So some really, really thoughtful things there, Ben. And I must just sort of thank Cath for that whole piece around how we give. And I don't know how many of you have a local garage. When you go and pay for your petrol, it asks you if you want to give 25 pence to some nebulous charity. But the fact that it prompts you to think about it is one of the real challenges for charitable giving, because everybody would like to do something but often forget to do it. And I must sort of really concur with the whole piece around matching being such a brilliant incentive on corporate schemes, because I spent about 20 plus years of my professional life doing tax. And there were a lot of tax incentives around charity over those times, some of them involving strange woodlands and all sorts of oddities. But they really didn't do all that much. But matching does seem to be hugely impactful on corporate giving. And a couple of weeks ago, we had Helen Brand talking from the ACCA about a Generation Z report that the ACCA have done, which is a fantastic report. I really recommend everyone reads it. But it is so powerful within that, about that desire for people of that 18 to 25 generation to really see the organisation that they are working for or want to work for doing something that's a bit more meaningful and being very purpose-led. And I actually think that stretches way beyond the 25-year-old age group. I think right through to old baby boomers like me. You want to see your organisation doing something thoughtful, and matching does seem to be incredibly impactful to encourage people to think about it and then to give, and works a lot better than those sort of let's have our charity of the year, let's maybe do a bit of fundraising occasionally. Something that really is encouraging people to give on a regular basis and see it as part of their way of giving something back to the community. But when we get to questions, I'd love to hear from Cath about things she's seen that corporates are doing that have really made a difference, and maybe some ways that people have managed to find good opportunities to raise the profile of While Giving Matters. Very last one from me, Richard, before you pull the plug on me. Being involved in a couple of charities myself, it's been the last 12 months just been a nightmare on fundraising. It's just dropped off a cliff unless you're in a very niche area that's had a lot of government support, which has usually been related to mental health and the pandemic. But most charities are really struggling, and they are quite a few will undoubtedly not make it through this year if they haven't fallen down already. So there is a real need to be able to help the not-for-profit sector in some meaningful way. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. No, thank you. And we'll definitely come back to those questions in a minute, Cath. So sharpen your pencil, as they say. Jeremy, welcome, and thank you for joining us. And today Jeremy's actually on holiday, so thank you for interrupting your holiday to be with us.
No problem.
Call of duty. As the managing partner of a mid-sized accountancy firm, obviously, this whole area of giving is going to be something, and the community in general is some responsible business, various terms float around me. Where do you see it, and where do you think, as leaders, most of the people on the call are leaders, where can we actually help move things forward in a positive way?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Richard, and thank you to Ben and Cath for very good topics this morning, very interesting. Just where we are as Haysmacintyre, I suspect when Francesca mentioned a couple of things there, I sort of thought, I slumped in my chair a little bit and thought, yeah, that's exactly where we are at the moment in terms of charities of the year and that sort of thing. But I think we have moved a fair amount over years. I mean, as a business, and I'm sure we were no different within professional practices, but 25 years ago, there was very little done from the centre, and indeed the view that we always took as a partnership, certainly in terms of the partners, when we were approached about charitable giving from a firm perspective, the response then was, it's down to the individual partners to make their own choice, and they can do that out of their own profit share. It wasn't for us to dictate at a corporate level what should be done. Of course, that's moved on significantly, and absolutely over the recent years we've had a strong CSR program, and we do have a strong Charity of the Year program, and that is very helpful. We raise a lot of money, and we do support that as a corporate as well as there being individual donations given. But certainly it's been very useful over the last 12 months in terms of bringing our people together as well. It's been, we've had various events, obviously virtual events, but that has had two benefits. Both it's been good from a giving point of view, but also very good in terms of bringing our people together. I do think as a business, we do need to start thinking and moving towards the next stage. I think, I've said before on this program, nearly 50% of our employees are within 3 or 4 years of leaving university, because we recruit so many graduates a year on training contracts, etc., etc. So there is a greater expectation among that generation with regard to our own values and the impact of that, and what they're looking for. And certainly this is an area that is important to them. I was interested by Cath's comment, about young professionals feeling unsupported in this area, and that's certainly something that resonated with me, and I noted down to take back and take away from this session. So, yeah, I think, look, I suspect we're fairly similar to most professional firms at the moment, but I think there's more to be done.
Yeah, and I think anybody who considers there isn't more to be done is probably deluding themselves as well, Jeremy. So thank you for those helpful thoughts. Turning back to Ben, if I may, and again, just kind of picking up this point around collaboration and tech being an enabler, and sort of, can you give some case studies possibly of where a firm has decided that just allowing the CIO and a partner to work together is sufficient, and where actually they brought more and a wider range of people together?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably 3 or 4 years ago, and this applies to some of the largest firms that we have as customers, but they started to bring together teams of people under the guise of digital, and it wasn't technology, it wasn't marketing, it was just digital. And it was these teams were probably the early stage innovation teams, as they seem to be cropping up all the time now, where you're bringing together different areas of the business under the guise of innovation. They're looking at ideas, they're gathering those ideas, and they're delivering against them or running proof of concepts. And I think that's becoming more mature. But I think the teams that have been doing it well is I know of one customer who plucked 2 people from IT, a person from marketing, a person from what was early stage, sort of their experience or customer experience kind of role, and joined them with a collection of sort of seconded paralegals. And they had one partner that was the sponsorship of the group. And they brought them together, and they went off and they just solved problems for customers using technology. But the customers, it wasn't just a solo customer, if that makes sense. Although it did start like that, it was, okay, one customer has this problem. Now what can we do with this? Is this solution scalable? Can we deliver this to all customers that are like that? How does that evolve? How do we take it to market? So it isn't just the technology, it's almost like running a mini business around that idea. And those teams are driving so much success for those particular firms that are running them. And they're difficult to set up, because you try and find the right skills and it's not always the people that shout the loudest that are the best people for those teams, if that makes sense. But it's really interesting how that's evolving. Almost now has been eclipsed by the innovation teams, and the innovation teams have sort of consumed that idea. But that's exactly what we're seeing in the market with a lot of our customers.
Cath, just to turn to you for a minute, and there was a couple of really great points that Francesca raised, if you recall. But from my point of view, going back to Jeremy's point around, we started off saying it's all up to the individual partner. We don't really, it's up to them how they decide to give. To what extent do you see, using the analogy that we just had from Ben, teams, innovation teams, people within the firm, possibly bringing in the millennials, actually looking at how as a firm are we actually really making sure that we are doing the right thing?
It's a great question and great observations from both Jeremy and Francesca. And I think the key here is alignment. What you're trying to get to is a place where there is a corporate strategy around giving. Now, that it means 2 things. It means enabling all of your colleagues to do to give in the ways that they want to, but also to have a kind of corporate strategy around that, if you will. So it's quite common for firms to set up, let's say, corporate foundation. Really good examples here are people like EY, which has a corporate foundation that focuses on children and young people, but very, very specifically around enabling disadvantaged children to get disadvantaged young people to get workplace apprenticeships. So it's a very specific thing that kind of connects all of the things that they do as a professional services firm, enables that social mobility, bringing people in to do kind of professional services training that they perhaps otherwise wouldn't have access to. And that's something that the whole firm can get behind. You've got others like Lloyd's that have put in place like a really professional grant making team who work right across the country on social issues across the board. And they've got an absolutely fantastic grant making team that can do that, can find where the big problems are, can find the charities that are supporting that need. And they've put a real big push behind, Lloyd's in the community nationally. And then you've got some organisations that will just focus really specifically on a theme. And there's an engineering firm that we've worked with called Cummins, and this is actually my charitable life. But Cummins is a partner of the charity that I chair, and we focus on women and girls empowerment. And so, of course, for an engineering firm, again, this kind of reinforces their message around diversity and inclusion. And they're a fantastic partner. They empower us not only to give across the UK to organisations supporting women and girls, but they also help us to run what we call a Grants Plus programme, but effectively a professional development programme for all of the charity leaders who don't have access to all the capabilities they would have in a big professional services firm. We can give them that on an outsourced basis. So there are lots of ways that you can do this. I think the key thing is try to think of it as a strategy. Try to think of it as reinforcing your values as a firm and bringing some expertise that can really help you focus on this.
Francesca, just bringing you in for here. I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about where your firm at a corporate level has approached giving, or if that's the appropriate word?
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I think we've done some good things. I think we've done some things that haven't stuck. I think everyone has to be quite realistic about what's worked and what's not. We've done some payroll giving, but I was fascinated by those stats that Cath gave about how little the take up has been on that compared to, say, the US, where I think that idea of giving a corporate way has become far more ingrained. I think there's a lot we can learn from why is that stuck and why is that being promoted so effectively in the US and less so here. We've done a whole range of things, but the ones that probably have had the most meaning is when people have actually gone and done something tangible in relation to their giving. So they've been, it might be, I mean, none of these are particularly rocket science like, but I think the ones that people always talk about is when they take a day or a couple of days off work, they go and do something quite tangible with an organization, and then they carry on giving to it and getting involved with it. I mean, there's a lovely, lovely charity that's quite close to actually where I live, which gives small gifts to young kids. So people who are really struggling to pay for presents, clothes and basics in that sort of young children range. And quite a few of our team went out, helped put some packages together, met quite a lot of the people benefiting from it, and then went on. Actually, one of them went on to the board, another one helped them with their marketing. So they took their day job skills and transferred it into the not-for-profit sector. So it felt very real. They could see the impact, but they got out of it far more than they put into it, is how they would describe it, because they saw a whole different variety of opportunities to be really constructive. And I think that's the things that really stick with people, is that tangible sense that you're making a difference, but you're also seeing something that is really life-changing. Can be quite dramatic for those who get that involved.
Jeremy, perhaps shifting back now, if I may, to Ben. I know he's got to leave us shortly for his second jab, but the whole area of innovation and how you bring people together from across the firm, I mean, how do you approach that within Haysmac? How do you approach that area?
Yes, we do. We have an innovation team. Certainly, it's a big part of our new strategy we're looking at the moment, and very much bringing together people from different parts of the business to work together. Tech is probably one of my weak spots, I have to confess. But for me, I do break it down and look at it quite simply and say, is it going to improve our efficiency from a financial perspective? Is it going to improve the work situation for our staff? Are they going to have a better working environment, a better experience? And is it going to improve our clients' experience and engagement? So those are sort of the simple questions that I have when there's any sort of innovation talked about and what changes we might make. Obviously, there's an overriding factor, which I think is really important at the moment, always is, but it gets increasingly important, and that is around security. But I have a fairly simple view on these things, and it's certainly around that efficiency, and does it improve the experience both for our people and for our clients?
And I sense, Jeremy, you are in the strong majority when it comes to managing partners with that approach to technology. Many of whom lived in an analog world and are quite happy with it and wonder why everything suddenly needs to be tech. But if we didn't have tech, we wouldn't have got through the pandemic. So there's pros and cons, I think.
I suppose just one thing I was just going to say, Richard, was what we have to also consider is we have a huge range of clients that we're dealing with. Particularly in terms of natures of business, age profile of clients. So a lot of the things, we have to bear all that in mind, and that can complicate the situation.
Fantastic. Well, I can see Ben's just leaving us now to get for his jab. So thank you, sir. And I shall look forward to catching up later. So, Cath, just kind of coming back to what we were talking about. I mean, you mentioned that there was a lack of statistics around the whole area of corporate matching, match funding. I don't know how to describe it. In the US, it's sort of 70%, but you're not sure about the UK because there isn't any data. I mean, is that something that we maybe could help you with? I mean, is that something that would be helpful? I'm just always looking for ways to help myself as a forum.
I think it would be fantastic, actually, if Managing Partners Forum could help us with that. That would be brilliant, because we know that firms are doing this. We know that pay as you give as you earn is offered. We know that match funding is offered, but it just seems there's a bit of a dearth of data. So yes, please, if it's possible to get a question onto one of your surveys, that would be fantastic.
We do a poll every week, as you probably gathered. So I'll get back to you on that one, as they say. Francesca, Francesca, just picking up the innovation aspect for a minute, and we've only got a couple minutes left. But I mean, are there sort of and I think as a larger firm, they've been involved. You've probably been involved in these sort of innovation teams for many years. But are there any sort of lessons that you can learn that you might be able to share with somebody who's a bit earlier in that phase?
Well, I actually think that there's just a lot of it is an enormous amount of common sense, in the sense of bringing together a diverse group of people and some different mindsets. I mean, various terms go in and out of fashion, but I think the logic stays really strong. Is it a sprint? Is it a scrum? Is it just a bunch of good people getting together and thinking differently? But I think having that range of different skill sets coming together, thinking about an issue, is always very powerful. I think I mean, the classic sprint type situation is you create something in a very short period of time. So those things work incredibly well, where you've got a very definitive problem, issue, something you're trying to solve, and you get something, again, quite practical happening in a short period of time. One of the big pieces is to get buy-in at a senior level, so that all that energy, all that passion, all that enthusiasm, they know it's supported. And I think the other thing that really has worked incredibly well is not be scared to fail. So you have a go at something, you might not get the perfect answer out of that innovation team on the first iteration or even the 72nd iteration, and having the support to know that it's okay to try something, and if it fails, you keep moving on. And there's been fantastic research done from people who look at parallel hierarchical organizations where you've got the normal business running along and a slight innovative parallel piece happening to give you a chance to try something new that goes slightly outside the bounds of the norm, but is supported by the traditional route. So I think there's just lots and lots to learn about how you can take a diverse view and then see how it goes. And sometimes it will be successful and sometimes it won't, but at least you've tried something a little bit innovative to see if it can take you to a different place. And if all it does is confirm that what you're doing is great, well, that's got a value in itself. But I think that whole collaborative piece, particularly in the slightly more virtual world that we're working in today, will be undoubtedly a key factor in the future.
Thanks. Jeremy, any final thoughts?
Just coming back, I suppose, to the questionnaire at the start, and no one seeing their firm's income dip, and I would share that view as well. What I would say, though, is we are really taking an opportunity to review our fees and review the clients we're acting for and the sectors we're working in. So we don't expect it to dip, but we are certainly changing, in the process of changing the mix for the better, obviously, we hope, and are taking quite a critical and hard view on that at the moment. So that was just an observation from the questionnaire.
Thank you very much. As I said, it was the results were so stark this occasion. There wasn't much more we could add, really, was there? So thank you. Well, again, unfortunately, that's now the end of the show for this week. So I'd like to thank Jeremy for interrupting his holiday. I'd like to thank Ben for thinking through what he was going to do before he rushed off for his second jab. So hopefully not too distracted by that. I'd like to thank Cath for reminding us that we may be doing okay, but actually there's a big and very important sector that isn't, and how important it is that we get that right, because giving is so important, particularly to the millennials who work for us. And I'd like to thank Francesca for, as always, her insightful words of wisdom. So thank you, everybody. Next week, we've got a couple of guests. We've got Neil Carberry. Neil runs the recruitment and employment configuration, and they've been in the media quite a lot recently because guess what? Everybody is now suddenly looking for staff in all directions. So they've got some really interesting stats there. And a lady called Catherine McPherson, who is the Director of Strategy at Field Fisher, which is one of the more innovative law firms, and how she's been sort of setting the agenda there. So another interesting session, new month, 4th of June. So I hopefully will see you then. And if in the meantime, bye for now.